Hello. So today I'm going to talk about my paper entitled "It's Time for a Grammar Lesson: The Way Writing Tools Determine Our Grammar Usage." So in this essay, I ultimately argue that advancements in writing technology has reshaped our understanding of grammar, grammar usage, and our perception of grammar, and our grammar instruction. So first, I define grammar and multiple definitions of grammar and review how this conversation, or my specific discussion of grammar fits into the larger conversation. Second, I contextualize my argument into the greater scope of technology studies. Throughout, I apply concepts from technology studies to writing, demonstrating how writing tools of the 21st century ultimately determine, or at least inform, grammar and how we use it. So finally, I will suggest ways at the end of this paper how this can be applied in our classroom and how understanding technology in this way can ultimately impact our writing decisions for the best. So the first thing that I do in this paper is define grammar according to Patrick Hartwell's 5 definitions of grammar. The first one being grammar 1, which is a tacit understanding of grammar. This is the subconscious grammar that we native English speakers apply without even thinking about it, without actually knowing what the rule is. For example, articles. Many people know when to use the or the word the word and an, but they can't typically explain why this is or when to use one or the other. So grammar 2 is the scientific understanding of those grammar rules. So in grammar 1, people often can apply them but can't explain why. In grammar 2, that is the explanation. That is the rule of when to use the articles. So grammar 3 is grammar usage. It is applying those rules once they are known. This is grammar etiquette. It's things, for example, such as the word ain't. This is considered bad manners, bad grammar. Grammar 4 is school grammar. It is the rules that we teach, that we write up on the whiteboard to teach our students in schools. And then grammar 5 is grammar choices based on stylistic decisions. This, for example, is things like in poetry, we use a comma for an emphasis, not because it's grammatically correct, not because it is the place that we should place the comma that makes the most sense in the structure of that sentence, but we might place a comma there simply for emphasis or for a pause. So it is the stylistic choice, not necessarily the grammar rule or what is correct grammar. So after defining grammar, I then look at the different definitions involved in technology studies that can best be applied to what I'm talking about in this paper. The first one being technological instrumentalism. So instrumentalism is the idea, as defined by Andrew Feenberg and Christina Haas in my paper. It is the idea that that technology is a tool, that we use technologies for tools at our own discretion, for our own purposes and needs, that I use this highlighter to highlight what I want to highlight, that I have ultimate control over it. But the opposing definition is less human-controlled, and it is considered more autonomous. This is the idea of technological determinism. I define it in my paper as the belief that technology is not humanly controlled, but that technology controls us. I would have no need to highlight things if I did not have a highlighter. Having this highlighter in front of me ultimately makes me highlight. So it is control of me, not that I'm in control of it. So I then apply this concept of technological determinism to different media in writing. So before I get into that, I define media in my paper as the tools or the technology that we are using to communicate. This is an idea of mediation. This tool, this piece of technology, is mediating what I'm communicating to my receiver, to my readers. So I then identify different kinds of writing media. So for instance, An example of a medium in writing technology is the computer. It mediates the message we type on it. Another example is stone carving into stone, much more prehistoric. Another example is typing on a smartphone using pens and pencils and erasers and paper, typewriter, etc. So these writing tools are considered writing media, writing technologies, and they're used for different purposes of efficiency. So I then kind of explore this concept of efficiency in technology studies and technology theory, and how these different kinds of writing media are chosen because of their efficiency. So I ultimately find that technological determinism is the best category in which we can place technology, but specifically writing technologies. Depending on the medium that we are using, it ultimately informs our writing and specifically our grammar choices. So in choosing to write a message on a smartphone, to type out a text message to send to your friend, that rhetorical situation altogether, specifically the medium of the smartphone, of typing on that smartphone, that impacts how we perceive grammar, what we perceive to be good grammar, bad grammar in that situation, and then it changes how we apply grammar. For example, LOL. In a text message, you would not just type laughing out loud or I am laughing out loud at the previous message. That would be weird. Instead, you use the abbreviation LOL. So it's just kind of the idea that depending on the media, we then perceive what is appropriate, what is considered good writing, and what is not. However, people often don't see text message writing as writing. Whenever I ask my students what good writing is at the beginning of each semester, they write in their letters to me the same thing. Almost 90% of the time, they say good writing is not possible without good grammar. But then they're not able to define what good grammar means, and they also may not be considering the fact that grammar changes depending on the media. What is considered appropriate good grammar usage, that perception, our idea of that changes depending on the rhetorical situation, the discourse community, and specifically the media that we are using in those situations. So I used the cell phone example and the use of LOL and text messaging. The next example that I have in mind is typing an academic paper on a computer. That ultimately changes as soon as we pull out our laptops, as soon as we get on the computer, we know that we're not just writing a text message. As soon as we pull up Microsoft Word, the word processor, we know that we are typing something much longer than a text message. We are going to spend more time with those commas, with thinking about grammar rules critically, maybe even drafting. That medium then determines how we write. So it is impossible to ignore the fact that this idea of good and bad grammar began with writing. This is something that is not oral. This is something that, or this construct of good and bad grammar, is something that we have applied to people because of writing. That being said, the medium that we are using to write with, whether it be stone carving into stone, pen and paper, the computer, the smartphone, that ultimately impacts what we see as good and bad grammar, appropriate writing for those situations with those mediums. So overall in my essay, I'm arguing that writing technologies, these media, inform grammar, our perception of grammar, our grammar usage, and it should inform our grammar instruction. We cannot keep teaching students traditional grammar without helping them to understand why we're learning it, what it applies to, which is obviously standard American English, and how this differentiates from their other writing situations that they find themselves in. They, or all people, we write every single day. We're reading and writing more than anyone ever has before in history. We can't ignore the fact that we are reading and writing more often, and that we are reading and writing differently, and that this definitely impacts and changes with each individual situation, our writing and our grammar specifically. So to help our students understand this, to help them become more metalinguistically aware, we can then apply activities of reflection and analysis in our classroom. For example, you can have your students to look at their text messages, to look at the past essays that they have written, to look at a letter that they have written in their life, a journal entry to themselves, to look at an Instagram post, a social media caption, and analyzing their writing habits in these different writing situations. It helps them to see themselves as writers and can ultimately make them and us more metalinguistically aware, which will then inform our writing decisions. The only way that we can best use grammar, best teach grammar, and best perceive of grammar in writing is to understand it on a metalinguistic level, especially in terms of technology and the medium that we are using to write with. So that is essentially what I wrote about in this paper. In this paper, I've also drawn on the ideas of Christina Haas, Walter Ong, Robert Heilbroner, John Oliva, Andrew Feenberg, Lull and McLuhan for the technological studies ideas and technological theory. In terms of grammar studies and instruction, I drew on the ideas of Linda Braun, Patricia Bazell, and Beaufort, and others. So that is my paper. I hope that this hopefully sheds light on how media affects our writing. I know it did for me.